Evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for this virtual program about the Cap Gallery artist Guy Goldstein. As people are filtering into the room, I thought I would run a video, some music video from a previous project he completed that he references during the talk you'll hear tonight. So I'm going to share my screen.
B-Wing! Again, shot. Are you listening? Are you listening?
I shall not see a world that will be dear to me. Summer without flowers, kine will be without milk, women without modesty, men without valor. Time has come to lay down with all the food that might soon.
B-Wing! Again, shot. Are you listening? Are you listening?
I shall not see a world that will be dear to me. Summer without flowers, kine will be without milk, women without modesty, men without valor. Time has come to lay down with all the food that might soon. Now I got some youth with me. Is anybody like to see?
Are you listening? Are you listening?
Captured without a king, woods without a mast, sea without produce, wrong judgments of old men, false president of lawyers, every man a betrayer, every boy a reaver. Time has come. Let's beat the drum. Here come the screw. It's sad but true. Now I got some youth with me. Is anybody like to see?
John boy. Are you listening?
Yeah, lot of that.
Son will enter his father's bed. Father will enter his son's bed. Everyone will be his brother-in-law's brother. An evil time. Son will deceive his father. Daughter will deceive her mother. Time has come. Let's have some rum. Hey, Johnny boy. Atlanta hug. Now I got some youth with me. Is anybody
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. You are entering this program to a video called The Mighty Zoo from a project Cap Gallery artist Guy Goldstein completed in 2018. The larger project is called Silence Isn't Very Much. And I wanted to start the program with that because he does reference it in the program you will be seeing this evening. But before we get into clips of a previously recorded conversation I did with Guy, I wanted to make some introductions. We're joined tonight, of course, by Jack Becker, Executive Director and CEO of Joslyn Art Museum. For those of you who may not know me, my name is Karin Campbell. I am the Phil Willson Curator of Contemporary Art at Joslyn. And we were supposed to have a third panelist with us this evening, Rachel Adams, who is the Chief Curator at Bemis Center for Contemporary Arts. But unfortunately, Rachel's a bit under the weather, so she wasn't able to join us tonight. So a couple of quick housekeeping notes before we get into the program here. If you have any technical difficulties during the run of this event, please feel free to use the chat function. But if you have questions, which we will answer at the end of the program, please drop those in the Q&A. And if you're not familiar with Zoom, if you kind of go down to the bottom of your screen, you will see buttons for chat and question and answer. So those are the two functions we'd like you to use. So we've got a little bit of screen sharing that I'm going to be doing this evening, which can be a little bit clunky technology-wise. So if we run into any hiccups, please excuse those. But I want to start with a quick PowerPoint here to get things started. Okay, Jack, you should be able to see my screen.
Yes, I see it.
Great. So this program is going to focus on a new video that Guy Goldstein made for us in 2019 when he was the inaugural sound and experimental music resident at Bemis Center for Contemporary Arts. And typically for a program like this, we would have the artist present either in Omaha or even on Zoom. But as Guy is Tel Aviv-based, it is currently the middle of the night for him. So we did previously record a program and I will be showing clips of that. And then Jack and I will kind of in between the clips have some conversation about what Guy has discussed. And then this work that he made in 2019 titled Der Sekundenmacher. My German is not great, I apologize, but this roughly translates to timekeeper or second maker. And the meaning behind that, that title will become clear over the next few minutes. I want to thank our exhibition sponsors. This exhibition was made possible by Douglas County, Catherine and Terry Ferguson, Sarah Foxley, Shirley and Leonard Goldstein Supporting Foundation, and finally Artes. And Jack is going to talk here in a few minutes about what Artes is and how they helped us realize this project. So Jack, you want to tell us a little bit about how you met Guy through Artes?
Sure, and thank you all for being with us tonight. It's been a little while since I've been on the Zoom program, but it's nice to have some of you join us virtually. Artes is an incredible organization founded by a woman named Rivka Sakar in 2004. And really, their purpose is to help spread greater awareness about artists working across Israel. It's a nonprofit based out of New York. Rivka herself is based in New York and in Tel Aviv. And each year, they put on an incredible travel program where they invite curators, museum directors, critics to come to Israel for an incredible sort of nonstop 8 days of looking at art and meeting artists from early in the morning till often late at night. You're sort of traversing one side of Israel to the other, going to nonprofits, meeting museum curators, meeting artists, and sort of understanding the rich cultural landscape that is Israel today. And I was fortunate to be there in January of 2018. I became connected to the program through a close friend of mine named Izar Patkin, who's an artist based out of Tel Aviv in New York. And along the way, after I was accepted into the program, Chris Cook also from the Bemis joined us. So Chris and I had the chance to sort of represent Omaha in the Midwest as we traveled through Israel, and came across Guy and his work at the Herzliya Museum of Contemporary Art, which is just north of Tel Aviv. And just one of the quirky things that I remember about the Herzliya Museum and so many art museums across Israel, and it's even though it's a small country, and there are tons of arts organizations, art museums, but frequently art museums serve as an art museum. And there's also a portion of the museum that serves as a piece of military history that honors soldiers and the ongoing struggles of Israel. So it is a very interesting experience to walk into a contemporary art museum in Israel and also know that on one side of the museum, there is this sort of ongoing acknowledgement of war and everything else that is connected to that landscape. So that's how I came to know Guy.
Good. Well, I hope to have the opportunity to do the program myself at some point. I was supposed to go last spring, but we all know how last spring played out. So, okay, I'm going to stop share on the PowerPoint now, and I'm going to get into our clips. I can get the mouse to work here on my computer screen. Oh dear. It seems I have lost my mouse. Huh. There we go. Okay. Okay, so I will go in now to the first clip that we have for the evening. Oh, apologize, that's the wrong one. We'll get it here. Okay, this should do it. So tell me a little bit about your practice, if you will.
So yeah, I'm a visual artist, but I also started like since I was a kid. I was playing and doing music, and then I had a quite successful band here in Israel, in Tel Aviv. But after, I think like more than 10 years ago, I decided to merge these two fields, which was before like very separated. And somehow I decided to, like, whatever I write as music, to bring it into my my own practice as visual artist. And I did some works with like a proper sound artist, and then later I decided, like, I converted images to sound and vice versa, and I tried to listen to my own drawings and such things. And later on, I felt it's too technical, and it's too about like it's about physics and math. And then later I did this project that we're just seeing here, an image of it, and I tried to bring more emotion into the works, and I wrote a full album, like really like melody and music, and I was singing and playing it. Yeah, so
was this the first time? So I know you said you had a successful band in Tel Aviv. Were you writing music at that time, or was this the first time you were fully writing? Okay.
There, I never, like, you know, I'm writing my own parts, but I didn't compose or write lyrics or something like this. But then in this album I did for the first time. And then later on, I started to do more and more and writing my own music. And also in the film that we are seeing in the show, I wrote the music there. Yeah.
Yeah, and I do want to return to that in a few minutes, because the soundtrack is almost like another character in the film that you made for the Cap Gallery.
Yeah, I just want to say just something that is important for me. Like, I'm not declare myself or call myself a sound artist, because now I'm not interested in the sound or the sonic as a material, like sound artists usually do.
Sure.
I'm more into like the language of music and taking the expressions and the language itself and bringing it to my own interest. And like, if I'm speaking about history or some stories or whatever I'm speaking about, politics, it's always like I'm using the language of music to express it.
I almost committed the cardinal sin of not unmuting before I started to speak. So I want to say a bit more in a few minutes about Bemis's relatively new sound art and experimental music program after the next clip. But for now, I want to kind of draw out this distinction a bit that Guy just drew between sound art and what he feels like he does in his work. And I think it's worth just a very brief history lesson on sound art. So it emerged in the 20th century, mid-20th century, as part of this kind of movement away from traditional media, as well as kind of museological conventions and ways of displaying art. So we think back to someone like John Cage, who was an early artist to explore sound art. He did a piece called 433 in which he just sat completely silent, and his statement on the work was, "I have nothing to say and I'm saying it." I bring up Cage because he is a reference point for Guy, even though Guy claims he is not a sound artist. Cage is also known for his prepared pianos, where he would put a bunch of objects on the strings of a piano and then attempt to play that music, that musical instrument. And you'll see references to that later in this talk as we get more into the video Guy made for the Cap Gallery. But Guy is really adamant that his work is visual, it's object-based, it's intended to be seen in a gallery setting. And as we learned through the course of making this exhibition, installation is really quite important in the Cap Gallery specifically. And if you hadn't had a chance to see the show yet, I do encourage you to go. It is very much an experiential exhibition. So we've heard a little bit from Guy about how he approaches his work. When you met him in Tel Aviv, Jack, what can you tell us a little bit about that show? What was it that drew you into him?
Yeah, so we had a chance to spend a morning at the Herzliya Museum, and there was a number of shows of contemporary art happening at that time. And I had just the day before been at another institution. And for me, it was sort of this immersive experience. He was in a gallery slightly larger than our Cap Gallery, but it was very immersive, and it really did sort of address what you just talked about, this notion of sound as well as sculpture. It was a very sculptural presentation. I mean, I thought first and foremost this is sculpture, yet at the same time there was the sound element that was interwoven throughout that. Mm-hmm. We also had the chance to meet Guy, and he was, I remember, soft-spoken, but articulate. I remember sort of having to lean forward to catch what he was saying as I was listening to him. And I thought he was articulate and engaging. And I think referencing the Bemis, which we'll talk about it later on, I mean, it sort of seemed like this moment. And Chris Cook and I talking about, could this be a possibility for us to collaborate on something? And then also just this ability to deal with a subject, which is a very heady subject in Israel, which is about Wagner. Mm-hmm. Wagner is taboo. I mean, he is the basis for, Hitler adored Wagner and based the war on these melodies. And here is an artist who's taking the thing that is banned, that is taboo, that is, a terrible thing in Israel, and turning it a little bit on its head and understanding the context for where you were at this moment in Israel, having just been to Yad Vashem, the museum about the Holocaust, and understanding, that he was willing to try to grapple with this subject in an interesting way. So that it was music that was forbidden music, but seen in context of sculpture. It was a very sort of powerful moment, and there was a lot of richness to the work. So I think that's kind of what drew me into him.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up those specific points because Guy will talk here in a few minutes about how he really does ground his practice in his Israeli heritage, his Jewish heritage, and how that's always sort of serving as the backdrop for him when he's thinking about new projects, including the one that he made for the Cap Gallery. So I'm glad you brought up that point. I'm going to go ahead and share our second clip here.
A few years ago, I was invited to a residency in Northern Ireland in a Catholic village on the Irish Sea. Mm-hmm. And as probably most people know, it was like, there is still a conflict there in Northern Ireland, which is very much has to do with the conflict in Israel, the Israeli-Palestine conflict. Mm-hmm. And both sides, the Catholic and the Protestant there, are has to do, like, the Catholic are very into, they are support the Palestinians, and the Protestants support the Israelis.
Mm.
And I was invited to stay in Catholic village with, like, people didn't like the idea there that Israeli artists will be there.
Mhm.
And I was staying in an old, like 200 years old curfew tower, belonged to a musician, Bill Drummond, ex-KLF band. And then I went there with, like, after I did a lot of works about noise, like the theme of noise, what noise means, what colors of noise means. I went there with the question for people in the village and people that I met there, what noise means to you? And I recorded them, recording a lot of sounds, traditional music, traditional storytellers, Catholic sports that only Catholics play there, like hurling.
Yeah.
And I recorded everything I found there, and went every day back to the curfew tower, sitting there and compose and writing the album.
So were you kind of just walking through this town and meeting people and explaining who you were and asking for their feedback on these sort of central questions?
Yeah, and there was a guy there, Raymond. He was an ex-IRA prisoner. He was sitting in jail for 12 years. So he lived there. And he led me through the community there and told me a lot of story, how noise and sound led him through the years in prison, and how he could communicate with other prisoners. And, you know, little by little, I found myself listening to people that kind of support the other side, you know, the Palestinians. And it was very interesting for me to understand things through, like, our own conflict, which usually I you know, I'm a, how do I say it, like, I'm not supporting what Israel is doing, but it's even more of it, you know. It's like listen to the other side through a third agent. In writing this album and then playing it and then doing, like, going again and filming the film was very unusual for me, you know, to go out of my comfort zone and doing this.
So I like this conversation surrounding going outside of his comfort zone. And again, this all is sort of setting the stage for what's on view in the Cap Gallery right now, because Guy took a very similar approach here in Omaha. You know, we were fortunate that he was in town for several months and he really had an opportunity to explore his surroundings. He was meeting a lot of people. He was meeting other artists. I was kind of taking him around town. Rachel and Chris were introducing him to people. So he really was able to get a feel for the character of Omaha, and this led him into the history of Omaha, and we'll get into that in just a few minutes. So I wanted to mention a few words about the Bemis Sound and Experimental Music program. So Guy was the inaugural resident in this program, and it's quite impressive. It was initially funded through a Mellon Foundation grant, and they've got the works in terms of what an artist working with sound and music may want to use in terms of equipment and tools and recording space. And I believe it's in the next clip. Guy talks about how he was thrilled and honored to be the inaugural resident in this program, but he actually kind of took a turn away from maybe what we all thought he was going to do when he came to town. And Jack, I'm sure that you thought there was going to be this sound experience in the galleries. That's kind of what I had envisioned. But he kind of took us for a left turn, which I really appreciated. Any reactions from you, Jack, or would you like me to go?
No, I think you're going well. So just keep going with the next clip. I'm excited.
Okay, great. All right, let me get the next one loaded up here.
And I was snooping around the building and then going to the upper floor, and felt that something is like calling me up there, looking at the stuff that are available to the artists, and found some very interesting materials. And among them, there was the box of used gloves that I imagine, or it is good for me to imagine, or interesting for me to imagine, that it was belonged to the employees at this Bemis factory.
Mm-hmm.
And I went online and looked for the bags that the factory was produced, and I found some original bags. I bought them. And then I was looking at the gloves, and I realized that they have like two sides. One is still the white, kind of white, off-white side, and the other one you can feel and even smell the labor. I guess the space is smelly, right?
That's a little musty.
Okay. And I thought about, I was going around in Omaha, in downtown where Bemis is,
Mm-hmm.
and I saw only white people. And I was asking myself, where are all the Black people here?
Sure.
And I met some people in town, and I also was speaking with you.
Mhm.
And I realized that the Black neighborhoods are like far away, or not in the center, or kind of isolated. And it was like very weird for me, or you know, I was shocked.
Yeah.
And it was 2019, 100 years of the lynch of Willie Brown.
Right. Yeah.
I was reading about it. I was learning all the riots and all the episodes that happened there, and saw some terrible images of it. And I read about the how you call it, the labor kind of conflict that was in the beginning of the 20th century, right?
Yeah, the labor strikes following the war, and the sort of tension that helped feed among communities of color and traditional white communities.
Yeah. And like I did in Northern Ireland, I always thinking about myself being in those places. I'm not trying to pretend that I can understand it, or I'm part of it, or you know, it's not for me to judge or to tell the American people what to do and what not to do. But or the Irish people, or you know, so I always trying to put myself with my own history in those places, and kind of mimic or try to be a character in this place.
So, and I think it's easy to look at a project like this and to kind of take it at face value without peeling back a lot of the layers. And so that's one of the reasons I wanted to kind of dig into some of what was feeding Guy during his time in Omaha and some of the research that he was doing. And I think that this is an opportunity to stop and talk about the possibilities of a space like the Riley Cap Gallery. You know, we opened it in 2014, Jack, after you had this kind of vision that this closet essentially could become a viable gallery space. Were you thinking about artists, bringing artists to Omaha specifically, and sort of opening up those possibilities of response to this place? What did you have in mind, and how do you think Guy fulfills that?
Yeah, I remember, you know, one thing being inspired by is there's a museum in Hartford, Connecticut called the Wadsworth Athenaeum, which is the oldest art museum in America. And in 1974, they started the Matrix Gallery. It was a small gallery. They were ahead of the curve in terms of most museums, and that they devoted a space to the work of a living artist, and it changed all the time. And they, over, you know, decades, have really shown sort of amazing individuals at an early point in their career. And I think spaces like the Riley Cap Gallery or the Matrix, I had a similar space when I was in Nashville, allow us not only to see the finished product, but at times perhaps the process of getting to something. So I think that you mentioned the layering, peeling back the layer of how Guy came to have this installation with the sculpture and the 10-minute video and the drawings, that there is a way sometimes in a project space like this to understand process, inspiration, creativity. How does an artist think through a set of problems or topics or subjects? And in a way, I think you get a sense of his interests. You know, he is interested in sound. There's a piano and there's some music in the background. He is interested in sculpture, and he's interested in these sort of questions, whether it's in Northern Ireland, whether it's in Israel, whether it's about Wagner, or whether it's in Omaha. So I think when there's an opportunity to root a project like this within a local context that has larger national or international associations, I think it strengthens everyone. Yeah. And I think really the point of this was how we continue to bring things to Omaha that we'd always don't get to see unless we hop on a plane. And lately we're not able to hop on a plane. So even more important to give voice to artists who are doing interesting things in other parts of the world. And it's great when it coincides with something here in Omaha as well. That's a long answer, but hopefully.
No, that's exactly right. And you bring up a good point about, I think there's this myth even now that contemporary art can be stilting or inaccessible. And really one of the things we get to through the Riley Cap Gallery is this opportunity to show that artists are responding to the current moment. And in this case, Guy was responding to a whole kind of a myriad of things that were going on in Omaha. It was interesting that it coincided with the 100-year anniversary of Will Brown's lynching, and that kind of fed into the work. So like, it doesn't have to be this hard to access thing, contemporary art. It really is just a response to this time that we're all living in. And so I think, Guy's project really does a lot in feeding that. Okay, let's get the next clip rolling here. These are the opening moments of the video that's featured in the Cap Gallery. So for those of you who aren't as familiar with Bemis's building, this is all filmed at Bemis. And these are the gloves that you found in the materials archive. Was this clock, this little pocket watch, also found at Bemis? Mm-hmm. So I cut this clip just a little bit short. Unfortunately, Guy was having some connectivity issues when we were recording a couple of weeks ago, but it still gives you kind of a feel for the start of the video, even if it's a bit choppy. And actually, this is a good opportunity to encourage everyone to please go see the show. It is on view until the beginning of January, so you have lots of opportunities to see it. So I want to talk about this materials archive that we reference. I jokingly refer to it as the Cabinet of Curiosities at Bemis. It is an entire floor dedicated to stuff. So you'll find everything from a bag full of gloves to old television sets, chairs, tables, records. I mean, anything you could possibly be looking for is in this space, and it is available to all of the artists and residents who come through the program, either to outfit their studios, maybe there's equipment in there they need, maybe things become works of art as they did in this case. So the sculpture, so the video where the gloves are, that becomes a sculpture that is hanging in the Cap Gallery right now. So it's really, he said that he was kind of called to this space, and it's interesting that that took him away from the experimental music side of things. I apologize for swatting the air. I've got a housefly flying around my head. So Guy and I go on in the next clip, and I think I'll go right into this one to talk about the character he developed for this film. I want to mention he brings up the absurdist playwright Samuel Beckett. I mentioned this because his audio gets a little muddled when he's talking about Beckett. And I also want to mention the sound of his walking. The audio in the recording doesn't pick it up so well, but it's sort of this loud clumping noise, and you can hear it going at the same beat as this the sound that's ticking in the background. Let's talk a little bit now about who this character is and where this comes from. Can you give us some background here?
Yeah, so I thought about, I already did some plays of Beckett before, Samuel Beckett, and I was thinking about the absurd of a person that found this field of gloves, and then trying to collect them, put the blacks on one side in one bag and the whites on another one, which is stupid and absurd. And then, and he all the time walks. We cannot see now what is the sound that he walks and the steps.
Right.
But later on, we will see that he's walking on scale, on weights.
Yeah.
How do you call it? Scales?
Scales, yeah.
Yeah, human scales.
Yeah, like you might have in your bathroom at home. It's just to track your weight.
Yeah. And in this space and the way that I'm looking here, like I dress here, it sounds somewhere between, I don't know, like 1920 employee, but also kind of a Jewish guy from the shtetl, in Europe. Maybe he's a clockmaker or something like this. Like typical Jewish stereotype, right?
And then Guy goes on to discuss how this character is walking at 60 beats per minute, and at the same time trying to keep 60 pounds on each of the scales that's strapped to his feet. And there's a moment where he looks down and he's sort of balancing himself from foot to foot. And this is kind of a commentary on how we value laborers in contemporary society. And this is something that he returns to. I'm going to continue on with the next clip here, Jack, unless you have any reactions. Okay.
There is for me, always, there is kind of atmosphere, maybe. When I see this old factory and I'm wearing this clothes and I'm this character, there is always kind of reference to the factories during the Holocaust, right? Like this is my point of view, because whatever I do, or for Israeli people, when they see it, or Jewish people, they always think about those images, right? And I was dealing with this topic a long time during my first works, and my family coming out of Auschwitz and everything. And the guy that I invited to film it, he's German, living in Israel. And he did the film that I showed before in Northern Ireland as well.
Okay.
And the conversation, as he is third generation to German family, and I am third generation for Jewish family. It was very interesting for me to build this set with those talking about the reference to the factories and the camps and everything. I know, sorry, yeah.
No, go ahead.
No, I know that there is no relation, right? But the image and the labor and the atmosphere and the color are very much to do with this kind of Jewish guy being in this place. But this is Omaha, so what is he doing there? You know, it was, for me, it was interesting to kind of superimpose those ideas.
I just want to pause here. He mentions Auschwitz. His grandparents were Auschwitz survivors, and his grandfather survived a death march. And so this really does kind of constantly inform his worldview. And it's interesting to hear him talk about how just the interior of a building sort of brings up these very specific reference points and responses. I think I will go to the next clip. Let's talk about with this image on. So this is a still from the film, and I think you showed us in those early moments of the video where the gloves are flashing on the screen and then the screen goes to black, and there's this ticking sound that accompanies that. And we, you know, if you're familiar with music, you might know it's a metronome, you might not. It's a little bit ambiguous at first. We do eventually see the metronome, so we know the source of this kind of driving beat. But in looking at these gloves scattered and listening to the sort of ominous sound of this ticking, for me, it's hard not to watch this and think about things like, you know, the crisis south of the border in Mexico as people are trying to flee dangerous situations in their home countries in South America and Central America and come to the States seeking a better life. We know that is a very dangerous journey, and there have actually been art projects about the things that these people have left behind, or thinking about desperate Afghans trying to flee the country once the US military pulled out, or recent hurricanes, wildfires, tornadoes, the sort of detritus that's left behind from those things. So there's this strong sense, I think, in the film of something has happened. This feels like the sort of aftermath of something. I mean, there's just sort of a general ominous tone. I'm wondering how, you know, if those sorts of current events, so we know that the factories during the Holocaust and death marches really informed this work. How did more current events tie into this for you?
Yeah, so I think all of what you mentioned are kind of echoes here. And I relate to those gloves as relics to something that happened. It might be a catastrophe because the way I scatter them, it might go to this way. It might be something that was like a lot of labor and a lot of sweat and maybe suffer. Went through those gloves, and I'm not saying anything bad about Bemis factory, right? I just you know, I just charged them with those ideas because for me it was like finding a treasure of something that, wow, these smelly gloves and dirty gloves were part of bodies that works every day with those machines and these greasy things.
So this kind of ties in then to the next conversation we have, which is about, and this is how we're going to close out the conversation, kind of the value of the arts. I'm sorry, actually, he talks about the soundtrack first, so we'll do just a minute on that, and then we get into the role that art plays in contemporary society. Jack, any reactions you'd like to share at this time?
Yeah, I mean, just for me, what I'm always struck by with the gloves is that when he fills the piano with them, which in many ways, you know, a Jewish casket is nothing but a wooden box. When he closes the lid, is very sort of funeral-like in a way of these bodies or references to humans, and then the closing of the casket. So that's just one thing that I kind of picked up on.
Yeah, that's a great reference point. Thank you. Okay, get the next clip rolling here.
And the sound, if you're asking about the sound, is this character is walking with the rhythm of the metronome on 60 BPM, like the clock, like 60 seconds per minute. And every step he's saying ta and then te, ta, te. When I was a kid, we, like in kindergarten, we used to learn, it's called rhythmics, and they're teaching the kids to bang on a wood and learning what's different between the up beat and the down beat, I think you call it, like the ta 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 te ta and etc.
Yeah, that takes me back to first grade really quickly.
and he's saying ta and te, which brings me to Yiddish. Tate means father in Yiddish.
Means father. Okay.
Yeah. And the music, when I was a kid, my mother just was humming this melody, which is maybe she just bring it out. I don't know where from. And I remember this melody. And then I compose it here as a kind of orchestral part. And then later it becomes even more dramatic and yeah.
So now from this part of the conversation, we conclude with talking about the value of labor. And we had a kind of a conversation about recent labor strikes in America, since there have been a lot of them recently. And Guy shared that they're kind of going through a similar labor movement in Israel right now. So I'll get to clip number 9 here. And this is the next to last clip.
I was thinking about, even this was before the pandemic, right? But still, I always think about myself as an artist, and maybe I'm privileged, you know, or I'm just lucky. But you know, that's why I did the piano with it, because I thought about the musician hands having this pedicure, manicure, I don't know how you call it. Lubricate it with cream and practice the flexibility of his fingers, and then playing the piano with it. And these fingers, the human fingers, can do also this kind of hard works, injured, suffer, and also what you just said, you know, who is essential,
right?
Is the artist is essential. I don't know. We also asked here, you know, all the community of artists I saw online and on Facebook, asking if we are essential, if we still need the culture, because, you know, all the cultural institutions cut out of budget, and nobody is still in theaters here. They are not working, and all the musicians, like all the concerts canceled. So are we essential as well?
And then I'm going to go right into the last clip, and then Jack, we can have a little discussion because it kind of carries on this thread.
If you take the how do you call the Maslow pyramid, right? It's not on the base. It's not. You think it's not on the base, but if we cut all the culture and the art, this is the difference between the human and animal, right? We need it. This is the spirit. This is, but still,
understand the world better.
Sorry?
It helps us understand the world better. I mean, that's what the you know, for me, one of the greatest values of great art is that it can reframe how we understand the world around us, or sharpen how we understand the world around us.
But still, then I think about the employee at the hospital, or the garbage cleaner on the streets, you know, and I'm still asking myself, am I privileged, you know? And yeah.
So that's a little bit of a bleak note to end on, perhaps. But I think it's important because it's questions that a lot of us were asking, a lot of people who work in the arts, a lot of people who consume the arts and support the arts since the pandemic started, in the wake of social justice movements last summer. These are, and again, this goes back to the point, Jack, we just discussed of how can we put these really timely and often some of the most difficult to discuss things on the table and make them kind of accessible and encourage discussion about them. So I'm wondering if you have any kind of concluding thoughts, and then I'd be happy to go to the question and answer section if anyone has any questions.
Sure, I'll reflect a little bit on our friend in Israel and then just say a couple closing remarks. I mean, I think that this notion that museums can be places for the discussion of dangerous ideas holds true, that the arts allow us an opportunity to think about things in a different way than in a lecture or an article, etc. And then museums are those places where you can have those kinds of conversations, that museums are also places for people of refuge during a pandemic, during the stress and all the things. The museum provides a bit of relief, a bit of joy at times, as well as a place to be confused, inspired, want to create. But I think all these kinds of things should happen. And it really is about how we expand our bandwidth, whether it's locally or nationally. And hopefully the arts allow us to have a moment of refuge, but it's a time also to expand our thinking about things in the world today. And I think that, the Riley Kapp Gallery has really been one of those places within the context of the museum where we have a chance to meet artists, to hear what they have to say, and to see what it is they are trying to say through painting, sculpture, medium, sound, sculpture, etc. So I thank all those people who help make programs like this possible. We could not have had this great project without the initial help of artists and all the great work that they do to work with museums across this country to help us grow our understanding of the rich cultural traditions that are happening in Israel today. So I thank you all for being here. And I thank you, Karin, for pulling this together in the midst of the pandemic. We had hoped to have Guy here. That was not possible, but it was great to see him speak with us tonight. So thank you all.
Yeah, thank you all. Have a good evening. I don't see any questions, so we'll end it there. Thank you.